while my fin and launch lug glue is now drying, we can look ahead to the nose cone. And this comes fairly smooth, but if you look closely here, there's a seam on either side of it from the molding process. And often there's a little bit of a valley in between the seam as well. And so we may need to sand down some raised edges as well as fill in that valley if you like. You can assemble the rocket without doing anything to the nose cone, and as long as you're 10 feet away, you probably won't notice any difference. But if you do want to make this smoother and also make it easier for the paint to stick, take some 220 grit sandpaper and use it to first of all take down any edges along that seam. And do that on both of the seams. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing just all the way around the nose cone. I'm just going to sand it lightly. I'm not trying to remove a lot of material here. I'm just making the surface slightly rough at more of a microscopic level so that the paint has a greater surface area to stick to. Okay, once you've got that, go ahead and wipe down the surface either with a cloth moistened with a little bit of water or with some alcohol. I like to use a little rubbing alcohol as it dries quickly. Okay, and just remove all the excess dust there. And just let that dry for a moment or two. Okay. Now in some cases this may be all you need, that either you don't have a lot of a groove here or you don't care. And if that's the case, you can either leave it sanded the way it is or even give it some additional sanding with 400 grit sandpaper and then paint it. If you want to do more about the little grooves in there though, you can use some plastic modeling putty, and this comes from several different companies. This one I believe is Testers. And this stuff, you just run a small bead along that channel. And the nice thing about this particular one is that it's water soluble. But it's made for filling in on model or plastic models, including the nose cone here. So once you got that bead on, just smooth it out with your finger. Fill in the gap there. And then go to the other side and do the same thing. Now this dries fairly quickly, so you want to get your smoothing done very quickly here. It's going to start tacking up really quickly. Okay, and then just let that dry for about half an hour, and after it's dried we'll come back and sand it down so that the only place the putty remains is inside the grooves there. So I'll be back after I let this dry, and I'll sand it off camera and then show you the results. The putty has dried and I've sanded off the majority of it. You can see there's just little traces of it here, and that's what we're looking for. It should be just filling in the low spots. And so I sanded this off with 220 grit sandpaper. You can do a finer sanding with 400 if you want to. I will do that actually after I hit this with some primer, then I'll fine sand it at that point. My fillets are dry, and now we'll come back to the instructions for the fins. For this part, you're going to need these little pieces here that are in the small parts bag, and these will be glued onto the surface of the fin so that they are going to go right like this. Okay, so that this corner of the little tab is going to be right next to the corner of the fin here and inside of the little tabs that come out here. So that's what this drawing is showing. If I turn this around to give you the same orientation as the instructions here, and now one or the other will be in focus, the other out. Okay, and we'll do that all the way around. So each face of the fin will have its little tab on it there. Before we put these on, you'll probably want to give them a little bit of sanding. So here I'm just going to use some 150 grit sandpaper and just flatten that out, and then just give these a few strokes on each face and on each edge. Okay, and then just remove the sanding dust there, and just take a small amount of wood glue or white glue. Let's see if I can get that to come out of there. Okay, and just spread that into a thin film there, and then go ahead and place that on the fin. You don't want to press down right away. You want to make sure you get all these corners lined up. Okay, so right about there. And then press it in and let that dry. With the small amount of wood glue that's on there, that's going to be tacky right away, and you shouldn't have any problem going on to do the other ones all in turn. I will do that off camera. Now that all the fin pieces are on and drying, our next task is to join the body tubes together. And so first we're going to need the coupler and ejection baffle that we made earlier. And then we need to mark the halfway point on that. Alright, so this is 2 inches long. Just need to make a mark right here at 1 inch. Okay, and then what we'll do is take our body tube, first of all, and we're just going to put a bead of wood glue right inside there. You can use white glue as well if you don't have any of this. Okay, and then with the screw eye forward, I'm just going to insert this, twisting back and forth till we get to our line there. Make a couple of little twists there, and this is just seating it well within the glue. Okay, and that needs to dry for about 10 minutes before we do the other tube. The glue to the lower half of the rocket on the coupler has dried, and so for the other part here, the first thing we need to do is take the shock cord and tie that onto our screw eye here. And just tie a couple of half hitches or a double knot into this. Now, if you prefer to use Kevlar shock cords and you have it available, you can just tie it on the same way here. Given the length of this rocket, I would recommend about 2 meters or about 6 feet of Kevlar if you're going to use it. Alright, and then I'm just going to put a little dab of my wood glue right on the knot. You could use white glue for this as well, but this is just going to help keep that knot from unraveling. Alright, get that good and taut there. Okay, and now we're going to take the upper body tube and we're going to slide the shock cord down through it. Okay, and now we're going to join these tubes together. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different here than what I've done in previous videos. So one of the things that always happens is that when we glue the tubes together, there's always just a little bit of a gap at that joint there. Okay, just part of that's due to irregularities in the tube, differences in shrinkage, things like this. So I'm going to try something a little bit different here. And so on the side here that is already glued in, I'm going to use white glue specifically. And I just want a little bit here. I don't want a great big thick bead, but I want it next to where the coupler is joined to the tube. And the idea here is that when we join the tubes, this glue will get squished up into the little gap there and fill it, hopefully, or at least most of it. Okay, and then you can use either wood glue or white glue here. Since I want the longer working time in this case, I am going to use white glue. Now the trick here is to keep from gluing the shock cord on this. So I'm going to run a bead all along the inside here. And I've got glue on the shock cord already. Okay, but I can pull that through. So now I'm going to pull my shock cord tight here so to keep it out of the glue. Alright, and now I'm just going to put this in and I'm going to twist it, and you can see where the glue now has come out around that seam. And I'm just going to take a tissue here and wipe off the excess. Okay. Now you could do this with wood glue, but it's going to leave one more color. But also it's going to try and set up really quickly. Wood glue just dries faster and sets faster. And you can still see there's a little bit of offset there. And again, that's really due to differences in the two tubes. So you can just kind of work that around. Alright, I'm going to make sure this is taut on this end, and that'll help keep it out of the glue inside the body tube. So at this point I am going to let this dry. My tube coupling is dry, and our next step is to add the cardboard bands that are going to go around the body tube here. So we're going to have to make some measurements. My first mark needs to be at 6 3/8 inches from the aft end. So that will be here. And then another at 8 3/16 inches. So that's going to be right here. And then a third one at 22 3/4 inches. My ruler does not go that long, but what we can do here is we can tell from the list here that our total body tube length between the two is 24 inches. So we'll just subtract 22 3/4 from 24, and that gives us 1 1/4 inches. So here we'll measure 1 1/4 inches from the top edge of the body tube. Okay, and I would recommend doing this on 2 sides. So go and turn it, let's see here, this way. Okay, and then once more, I'm going to bring my instructions back and make sure I'm not misremembering anything. Alright, so 6 3/8. Right there. Okay, 8 3/16. Right there. And another 1 1/4 inches from the forward end. Right there. So from our box of materials we have these, and so these are going to slide on from the forward end, and this is why we couldn't put the forward launch lug on yet. It's because these would not go over it. So we're just going to slide these down. Alright, so one will go there. I just want to make sure that it's on both marks, that way they stay on straight. And these are fairly loose, so they'll have a lot of play in them. Okay, and then the next will go down to here. And then the third will go right there. Now I am going to use some white glue on these instead of wood glue, simply because it gives me a little more working time. And I'm going to place it about 1/4 inch or so above each mark so that the rings slide down into it. Alright, so now I can just take my first ring here, and as it hits the glue, I'm just going to start turning it to spread the glue, okay, and bring it down to the mark. And I'm going to hold that in place with a finger, and any excess glue here, I'm going to make a really thin fillet out of that. Okay, and you can decide whether or not you want to make that fillet all the way around. I probably will, but I'm going to do it after this dries. So I'm just cleaning up the excess glue there. Okay, and let that dry. Since this is white glue, it's going to take a little longer. Let it dry for at least a good 20 minutes, and then you can go on to the next one. I'm going to do the other 2 rings in the same fashion, but off camera. My bands are glued in place, and I've also attached the forward launch lug. And when these are completely dry, I will go through and put on fillets for the rings as well as fillets on the forward launch lug. And then all we have to do is attach the parachute and the nose cone to the shock cord. As for painting, the instructions recommend white for the entire model, and then metallic aluminum for the nose cone, and then gloss black for the fins. And on the fins you're going to make a rotation pattern here where one fin is completely black and its opposite fin is just black on the forward part of the fin on both sides. You can either mask off the rocket and paint that black, or what will be easier, although a little more time consuming maybe, is just to hand paint that. I will probably do the latter on mine. The last structural step for this rocket is the parachute. And I've got my rocket base coated. It's not completely painted yet. My nose cone is painted. And so now I'm going to go ahead and install the parachute because the rest of my painting is going to be by hand. Alright, now if you've seen my previous videos, you're going to know that I'm going to put a snap swivel on this. Okay, but we'll go ahead and do it per the instructions first. And so I have gathered up the 3 loops of the shroud lines here. Now I'm adjusting this on the other side so that all of the corners are pretty close to even with each other. Okay, and so once I've got that, I'm going to come back to my other end here and just grab this loop so that the lengths of the shroud lines relative to each other don't change. Okay, and now I'm going to pass this loop through the eyelet on the nose here, and then you just pull it through, and I'm still keeping tension on the other side so that I don't change my relative length on each side. And then you can either pass the whole parachute through this, or you can pass the nose cone through it and pull it taut. Okay, either way will give you the same thing. Now I'm going to undo that because, as I said, I don't like to permanently tie my parachutes on. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to get a snap swivel ready, and this is, you can find this in the fishing department of department stores, sporting goods stores. Doesn't really matter what size the actual swivel is. You just need to make sure that the snap part will fit over the eyelet of your nose cone. Okay, any size that allows you to do that will be strong enough for the rocket. Now I'm going to go through again and re-isolate my shroud lines. Okay, and once more loop them over my finger. Okay, and then once more I'm going to pull these taut and just slide them by each other until all my corners are even once more. And over on this side, again, I'm going to pinch this so that they don't change. Alright, and then I'm going to take those loops and pass them through the swivel side of the snap swivel. Okay, then I need to tease those apart once more. So I'm actually working on the loop for all of them. Okay, and now I simply pass the entire snap swivel through that loop. Okay, and then just pull on it to tighten it down at the bottom of the snap swivel like that. Okay, and I'm just going to put a tiny little dab of white glue. You can also use wood glue for this. Come on, glue. Alright, and this is just to keep it from creeping up the eyelet like it's trying to do right there. and then it will keep that knot from coming undone and having the potential to change the length of the shroud lines or get tangled up with the snap swivel. Now before I attach that, we need to attach the shock cord, and I'm going to do this and then take it back off again, just because I need to do a little bit more finish painting. And that's easier to do with the nose cone off. Here I'm just going to tie 2 double knots, 2 half hitches. This would be 2 single knots or 2 half hitches. Okay, and again, I'm not going to tighten this down, but normally you would. Just pull this nice and tight so all of the loose stuff comes out. And then once more, you can put just a little bit of white glue or wood glue on that knot to help keep it from coming undone. Right, and then all we have to do is attach our snap swivel, and this one is just barely big enough for this nose cone. Alright, I just barely got that in. I'm probably going to change that out and put a bigger one in there. So that's just barely big enough to fit on there. Okay, but that's how it's going to go, and having that snap swivel then means you can pop this off. If you need to change parachutes quickly, maybe you need a smaller one because it's windy out or whatever have you. A lot of people like to store their parachutes outside of the rocket, so you can do that as well. And to some extent, the swivel here will help keep the parachute shroud lines from twisting so much. Okay, so structurally, that's the end of the rocket, and I hope you had as much fun building it as I do. Have a great launch, have a safe recovery, and please stay tuned to my next video.